Hi everyone, good evening. How are you all? I'm Dhwani from Geeks for Geeks and I will be the host for today's session. So today marks the first ever collaboration event of Geeks for Geeks and Itversity, and we'll just wait for a few minutes so that some more people can join in. And we have a very special guest with us today, and I'm sure he has a lot to tell us, and we all have a lot to learn from him. We'll just wait for 2 minutes. Till that time, kindly confirm in the comments if I'm perfectly audible to you all. Just give a thumbs up in the chat if I'm perfectly audible to you all. So, our today's guest speaker is Mr. Durga, who is the CEO and founder of Itversity and the CTO and co founder of Analytics. Hello, Durga, sir. It's a really privilege to have you here with us. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. How about you? And it's privilege to be the speaker of this session.
Thank you so much, sir. I am well too. We have a lot of audience today, and I'm sure everybody is more than willing to learn so much from you. So, sir, I would like to take up this opportunity to welcome you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Durga. I have close to 20 years of experience in IT. I started my career as a Java developer. Then I got into data-related projects, and over a period of time, I have worked in vast area of technologies. And I'm pretty means I have built the skills required both from the platform perspective. Linux is more relevant when it comes to the platform, and also I have worked in application development as well as data engineering. So as of today, these three are the prominent roles: platform engineer or DevOps engineer, application engineer or software engineer, data engineer. These are the actual roles on job, and Linux is important for all three. Over a period of time, I have mastered in Linux as well. And today, I want to be a little bit specific around Linux. That's why I'm emphasizing on this. If you wanted to know more about me, you can actually visit my profile and you can know more. And as of now, I am running two companies, as Dhwani mentioned. Uh, for one, I am the founder Itversity, which is a training and staffing organization. If you are interested to be associated with us to get training at affordable cost or free, and also assistance related to staffing, you can reach out to us at Itversity. In parallel, I'm also running a company called as Analytics, which will be a data services boutique. We'll be primarily focusing on data related services on top of cloud, and for that company, I am a CTO.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. We have a lot of comments in the chat. The people who are saying hi and welcome to you. So, without further ado, let's just start with the session. So, since today's session is based on Linux, and from what I have learned, getting started with Linux is a separate thing. First, we should know what operating system is. So, sir, can you tell us what is an operating system and explain its functions?
Yeah, before getting into the details about the operating system, first you need to understand what a computer is. Without understanding what a computer is, talking about operating system is not that what we say is not that clear when it comes to the understanding. When it comes to a computer, it is nothing but hardware. You will have a motherboard, but motherboard is just to install few components on top of it. If you ask me about the core components of the computer, they are nothing but CPU, which actually does the processing, memory, and hard drive. Okay, so these are the hardware components. On top of it, you will also have additional components such as networking and network devices and all. All of them will be installed on motherboard. Now, you might want to use your computer for multiple purposes. It could be listening to songs, or on daily basis, you might want to use your computer for work. Like that, you might want to use your computer in several ways. So to facilitate, you can use these hardware components. You need to install some software on top of it. The first software which you will be installing on your computer is nothing but operating system. On top of it, you will be installing additional software such as MP4 players to listen to songs or watch videos, Office to actually create Word documents, install browser to actually access the internet and all those things. In most of the cases, browser comes out of the box with operating system. In some cases, especially in operating systems such as Linux, you will not be getting these fancy graphical user interfaces which you are seeing as part of Windows, because Linux is prominent in deploying applications such as Gmail, whatever application you are using are actually hosted elsewhere, and those are actually hosted on Linux, and you don't find browsers and all out of the box there. But you will be using for other purposes. Based on that, we install whatever is required. So operating system is the first software which will be installed on hardware, which will facilitate you to perform whatever tasks you need to perform on daily basis.
Right. So, what are the most trending and the popular operating systems, and which one do you personally believe is the best one to work on?
So when it comes to day-to-day usage, Windows is the market leader, followed by Mac. Apple computers are being sold across the globe, and it is also having a decent amount of market cap. So for daily usage, such as listening to songs or editing videos, if you want to be a artist, uh, uh, or just use it as a interface to work with other projects, typically use Windows or Mac-based computers. These are the most popular ones. But when it comes to the application deployment, typically we prefer Linux. So Linux is the one which is used to deploy the applications on top of it. Our applications such as Gmail, or even if you are using Flipkart application might be running on Linux-based operating system. Amazon might be running on Linux operating system. All these applications which we use using our browser might have been deployed on Linux. There are other flavors of Linux. On top of these things, Unix used to be very popular, but for applications, Unix is not used that often. These days, most of the applications are being deployed on Linux. When it comes to Linux versus Unix, if you are aspiring to be application engineer or DevOps engineer, irrespective of that, there are quite a lot of similarities between the two. Actually, Linux is a flavor of Unix itself. So, to answer your question precisely, Windows or Mac for day-to-day regular usage. For application deployment, Linux followed by Unix.
I actually
Even
have.
yeah,
Yes, sir, go
one more
on.
thing. Even Windows is used quite extensively to host Windows-based applications, but market cap is a lot more towards Linux compared to Windows when it comes to hosting the applications.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. Actually, I myself, I'm a computer science engineering student, and I started my, like years with Windows. And my friends actually instructed me to move to Ubuntu, and I can see the kind of difference there is in hosting applications. So, I have a question that why is Linux becoming so popular these days, and what are your views on it?
Yeah, very good question. Linux is quite popular for quite some time. It's not new. A few years back, Microsoft typically used to push Windows for application deployment. But seeing the popularity of Linux, they started supporting Linux also in many ways. Azure, which is a Microsoft cloud platform, they officially started supporting Linux on top of it, seeing the popularity of Linux. Linux is already popular. uh, Learning Linux is becoming inevitable, because irrespective of your role, technical role, you have to deal with Linux day in and day out. That's why learning Linux is very, very important. As I mentioned to you earlier, most of the applications are typically deployed on Linux platforms. That's why it is becoming very popular. On top of Windows and Mac, even Ubuntu-based desktops are also becoming popular. So if you don't want to pay additional cost for Windows operating system, these days most of the computers are giving Ubuntu-based desktop on the computer, and most of the kids are actually using it as well. So Linux have a wide variety of uses compared to Windows or Mac. That's why it is becoming so popular.
Right. So, sir, since you mentioned it is most widely used and it is not something that has become popular nowadays, so how important is Linux for a computer science and IT engineering or non engineering student? And when should they start focusing on learning Linux?
So there is a huge disconnect between the industry and the college degrees. Okay, there's a huge gap. The gap is due to several reasons, irrespective of what your choice in the engineering, irrespective of when Linux is covered as part of your curriculum. I would recommend to start with Linux in the first year itself. Even if I have to suggest my kids, I'll suggest them to start learning Linux in the holidays of +1 +2, or even after getting the admission into the engineering degree or non-engineering degree, if he or she want to pursue IT job as their career path, then I would recommend them to be proficient in Linux even before they start first day in their college. And earlier, it used to be a challenge for people like us to learn. I'm also from a below middle class families. Being from below middle class family, I know it used to be very costly, but now there are quite a few resources with just few hundreds or thousands of rupees. You should be able to get required resources to learn Linux. So I would highly recommend to start as early as possible once you start pursuing your graduation.
Right, sir. So for a person who does not have a Linux based system, how do you propose that they start learning Linux, and what is the minimum configuration that is required for setting up Linux for practicing?
Yeah, so let me share my screen here and let me give a demo so that it is clear to you. Let me see. Okay, it is asking me to open system preferences. So just give me a minute. Let me give the permissions to this. I'm almost there. Okay, it is asking me to quit and reopen. Uh, okay, let me try rejoining if you don't mind. I'll be right back. Okay.
Sure, sir. So till the time sir joins back, let's hear from you guys. What are your views on Linux? Have you been using Linux for a long time? If not, are you a beginner and are you looking for ways to get started? If yes, drop it in the chat and I'm sure you'll find somebody in the community who will be more than willing to help you to get started with it. We would also be taking up some questions from the audience at the end of this session.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you're perfectly audible.
Yeah. So now let me share my screen.
Okay.
Please confirm whether you can see my screen or not.
Yes, sir, I can see your screen.
So if you guys look at this, I am actually using Windows 11. If you are using Windows-based computer, you just need to set up Linux using something called as WSL. It is very straightforward. We'll be providing the required details associated with the required details of the playlist, which is associated with this live session as part of the description. You click on it and you can actually get for step-by-step instructions about how to set up Linux on Windows. If the video is not available immediately, don't worry, we will be making sure that that video will be added to the playlist very soon. All you need to have is a Linux setup on your Windows using something called as WSL. WSL is known as Windows Subsystem for Linux. It is available out of the box with both Windows 10 as well as Windows 11. So this is nothing but Windows 11 desktop. This is nothing but search bar. As part of the search bar, I am launching the Windows PowerShell. If you don't see Windows PowerShell, you can always search here. So let me say Windows PowerShell. Now I have launched Windows PowerShell. As of now, there is no subsystem Linux running here. It is in stopped state. I should be able to start it just by running this command. When you actually try to set up for the first time, even if you don't have the virtual machine set up, it will automatically set up and it will bring up the environment for you. It is as simple as that to have Linux on Windows. However, keep in mind that it can be counterproductive if you are using a very old laptop with only 4 GB RAM and dual core. If you have modern laptops with at least 8 GB RAM with i5 and quad core, it will be fast enough. You will not see any disruption. But if you are using a very old laptop, using this approach can be a little bit counterproductive. Okay. Now you see I'm in the Ubuntu based system within Windows itself. It's very simple to get started. To check the configuration to see if you have required configuration to explore Linux on top of Windows, all you need to do is you can go to the task manager. Um, You should be familiar about all these things. What is a task manager in Windows and all. Once you go to the task manager, uh, you might end up seeing fewer details like this. If you're not seeing all the details about your system, if you have this more details option, you just click on more details, and then you should be able to go to the performance, and you can actually get the details about CPU, memory, disk, etc. CPU should be at least 4 here when it comes to logical process. 2 also fine, but your system might become slow when you start Ubuntu on Windows. When it comes to the memory, you can see that mine is 16 GB. In our case, even if you have 8 GB, you are good to go. If you are using Mac, you don't need to set up anything to get started with Linux. Typically, when we get started, we'll focus on learning Linux commands. To just get started to learn Linux commands, all you need to do is open Mac terminal, and you should be able to practice all the Linux commands. There will be some few differences, but you should be able to easily identify solutions for those differences and practice using Mac itself. Why Mac works out of the box without installing any Linux is because Mac is also Unix flavor. Like Linux is a Unix flavor, Mac is also a Unix flavor. Whatever commands we learn as part of the Linux are related to both Mac as well as Unix. So if you are using Windows, just set up Linux using WSL and move forward by practicing all the required skills related to Linux. If you are using Mac, you don't need to install anything. Just launch terminal and take it further.
So thank you, sir. I guess that explained a lot of things to a lot of people, and thank you for that. Like presenting a screen and explaining it to everyone. So, what are the different job roles which are like available for Linux users, and is Linux important to become DevOps engineer? What exactly is DevOps, and what other skills than Linux an aspiring DevOps engineer should learn?
Sure. So when it comes to Linux, all the job roles in IT where you are hands-on, it is very important. Except when you are working on core Microsoft technologies such as .NET, C Sharp, etc., where you will be predominantly working on Windows-based servers. The market cap for those type of applications have reduced quite a lot. Most of the applications are being deployed on Linux, and hence, irrespective of your IT technical role, it can be application engineer, it can be DevOps engineer, it can be data engineer, it can be tester. Even business analysts also these days are expected to know a little bit of Linux. So any hands-on technical role expects some level of work on Linux. Learning Linux commands at the least will actually improve your productivity quite a bit. Now, when it comes to DevOps engineer, for others, learning Linux is highly desired. It need not be mandatory, except for certain roles. In certain projects, you might have to make sure that you have certain level of Linux expertise. But for DevOps engineer, it is mandatory. If you don't know Linux, if you learn whatever skills, if you try to learn whatever other skills, it will always be half baked. Okay, it is mandatory to learn Linux. You have to be really comfortable at least with the Linux commands. Then you will be able to learn other things. So Linux is foundation for DevOps. Once you learn Linux to become DevOps engineer, you also need to make sure you learn server automation tools. What are server automation tools? As a DevOps engineer, you have to deal with hundreds and thousands of Linux servers for a given organization, and all these hundreds and thousands of Linux servers have to be managed seamlessly. If the server is down, immediately someone should get notification. Even if some application goes down on a particular Linux server, someone should get notification. And also, it should not take time to install certain things on top of it. So that's where server automation comes into picture. The tools that are popular with respect to server automation are nothing but Ansible, Chef, Puppet, etc. Ansible is the most popular one. On top of Linux and Ansible, which is nothing but server automation, you also need to learn cloud. Cloud is inevitable these days. Everything is going on to cloud. You can start with one cloud platform and pick others. AWS is the most popular one. And then you have to learn skills such as Terraform. Terraform is typically used to provision servers from cloud platforms, and then we use Ansible or Puppet or Chef to take care of the server automation. So instead of we buying the servers and then installing the operating system, we use tools like Terraform, which is a code-based tool. We have to write code. We can automate the process of provisioning hundreds of servers with a few clicks of buttons or few commands, and then we use server automation tools to set up whatever is required on top of it. And then finally, a small component which is important for DevOps engineers is building CI/CD pipelines, like Azure DevOps or Bitbucket pipelines or Git runners. These are the ones. Or Jenkins is another popular one. It's a very small component compared to others. First Linux for sure, then server automation, then cloud, then Terraform. A small component but very important component is ability to build CI/CD pipelines using Jenkins or Azure DevOps and so forth. So these are the key skills to become a DevOps engineer. You can start as a DevOps engineer at entry level, learning two of them. One is Linux, and then either Ansible or Terraform. And over a period of 2-3 years, you should be familiar with all these five technologies or five set of technologies, technologies in in these five areas, and then you will excel as a DevOps engineer.
Right, sir. So I usually hear about multiple Linux shells. So which one should I focus on?
Yeah, you don't need to worry too much about too many shells. Typically, most of the when we actually provision servers from cloud, they comes with bash by default. You just focus on bash, start running the commands and all. To confirm whether you got bash or not, all you need to do is you need to check your details as part of the Linux system which you are going to work. Once again, let me share my screen here so that you understand what I'm talking about. Uh, I'm still on Linux on Windows, which is set up using WSL. This have Ubuntu 20.04. You can see the details here. Okay. Now I should be able to run command called as ID to get the details about this user. The username is nothing but this one. We can pick this user, and then we should be able to say grep. Grep is primarily to search for a string in a file. For each and every user, there will be an entry in a file called as etc passwd. This is one of the ways to check uh, the shell that is configured for this user by default. You see here bin bash, which means the default shell is nothing but bash here. Also, you can actually run a command called as env, which will give all the environment variables which control the runtime behavior of the user sessions that are logged in. Now, even in this, you should be able to see the details about the default shell. Let me scroll up here. There should be an entry in this as well. You see here, shell equal to bin bash, which means you can also use commands such as echo, then $shell, which will give us the details about the default shell for a given user. So as long as you have bash, you are good to go. You should be able to practice all the important Linux commands. There are other shells also like K shell, C shell, etc. Don't worry too much about those things. To get started, you don't need to break your head around those. As long as you are using bash, most of the commands which are demonstrated across the internet will work without any gaps.
Right, sir. So, I myself am learning operating system, and what are the most common Linux commands that a beginner should know of? Like, what are the most commonly used ones? And yeah,
Yeah. So typically, again, let me give a quick demo about some of the important commands. I think I also have a demo planned. Yeah, I think it is associated with this only. I will actually give a quick demo about the power of the commands. Okay. For this demo, I'll be using Mac. Okay. So let me minimize this. Okay. Now I'm on Mac. Now let me actually open my terminal. This is Mac terminal. Okay. As I mentioned to you earlier, whether you are using Mac or Unix or Linux, the commands will work as long as we are using the terminal here. Now, some of the important commands are nothing but commands such as ls, which will facilitate us to get the details about the files. Now, let me actually say ls-ltr. You can see all the folders and files that are there here. On top of ls, you can also use find command to find files based upon certain criteria. You might want to find files based upon extension, or you might want to get files based upon modified time. Over a period of time, you will be modifying the files, right? If you look at the output of ls-ltr, for each and every file and folder, we have updated time. You might want to see what all files that are updated since yesterday. Okay. Similarly, if you have movies in your system, and if you want to find that movie file, if you're not sure about where that file is, if you want to find, you can use the find command and you should be able to search for the files. For example, let's say I would like to find all the mp4 files that are there as part of the downloads. Okay, so downloads folder here, I can simply say find downloads, which is nothing but path. Again, don't get overwhelmed with these demos. As part of the description, we'll provide the playlist. In the playlist, all the commands are explained in detail. You can follow those commands and you should be able to learn a little bit in depth of whatever is being demonstrated here. Just to excite you, I'm actually using simple commands to show how powerful Linux is to get the information we are looking for. Okay, so in this case, I just wanted to get all the mp4 files, which means the files with mp4 extension. I can actually say hyphen slash name and then star.mp4. So in this case, I'm checking by name in the downloads folder with the mp4 extension. Now I can hit enter. As of now, as part of the downloads, there are no mp4 files. Let me pick some other folder. Let me pick this movies folder. Most likely, as part of the movies, I might end up having mp4 files. Let me pick that movies hyphen name star.mp4. Even this one doesn't have. Let me actually look for dmg files. Dmg files are nothing but installable in Mac. I just want to see if there are any dmg files on my system. Okay, let me identify what all I have. Yeah. So let me get all the zip files. Okay, you see there are files with .zip extension. Let me get all the files with .zip extension. I can just say find downloads hyphen name, then start.zip. Now you see there is one zip file. Okay, if you wanted to get the size of the file, you can actually pass the output to other command. Find is so powerful. It is very important for you to get familiarity with find. It actually helps you in troubleshooting many issues. Okay, so in this case, I'm actually passing the output to exec. Then I'm using another command called as du-sh, which actually get us the size of the zip file. So in this case, I can say du-sh. Whatever output is returned, it will be passed to this additional command called as du-sh, and you can see the size of it. Okay. Now, if I want to get size of all the files in sorting order to find the largest file as part of my downloads folder, all I need to do is something like this. I can say hyphen name. I can even remove this. Okay. Now let me hit enter. You see, we got the size of each and every file. I would like to sort them in ascending order by size. Okay, I'll be checking only for files, file type, and hence let me say hyphen type yes. Now, 1 minute. Yeah. Now you see all the file sizes are displayed in megabytes. I would like to sort in ascending order by name. Now I can actually pipe the output. This is called as Linux piping. Understanding Linux piping is also important. The output that is generated by this command is being passed to sort, and I would like to sort by size. By making it as hyphen n, I'll be getting the sizes in ascending order by the files in ascending order by size numerically. You can see that this is the file which is taking most amount of storage. It is taking 120 MB. Like this, you should be able to search your entire file system and get the details. So find, ls, sort, unique. Unique is primarily to get the unique values. You can also use command called as cut to extract the information you are looking for. there is another important command called as awk, which actually facilitate you to filter your output or automate a few things around it. Du is another important command which actually gets us the usage of our file system. And most importantly, you should be comfortable using piping method like this, and you should be able to use multiple commands in tandem to solve the problem which you are working against. Understanding all these important commands and then ability to using multiple commands at once to solve your problems is the key aspect when it comes to learning Linux.
Okay, sir, I think that explains a lot to a lot of people. So, before getting into all these complicated commands and the system that like you just showed, can you tell us what are some prerequisites and sources for somebody who's just starting to learn Linux and like starting to install them in their system?
Yeah, as I have demonstrated earlier, WSL is important. If you are using Windows to set up Linux quickly, you don't need to pay anyone. You just have to start with it. When it comes to resources to learn, you can actually come to Geeks for Geeks or Itversity, and you should be able to go through the material out there, and you will get a lot of exposure to Linux commands. And on top of it, after a while, after learning Linux commands on one machine, you might want to explore Linux commands against multiple machines. Okay. For example, let's say you want to understand how to connect to remote machines using a command called as SSH. SSH is also a very important command to connect to remote machines. How to connect to the remote machine via SSH. For that, you might want to set up a remote server. For that purpose, you can leverage cloud platform. As I have mentioned to you earlier, there are quite a few free resources. You should be able to use those free resources and learn whatever is required. Let me actually bring up my WSL. Now you see I'm in the WSL, and also let me bring up this image for you. Okay, if you look at this, this is my Windows PC where I have Ubuntu also set up using WSL. Now using AWS and all, you should be able to set up multiple EC2 instances like this for free. You can see here, uh, I am actually running two EC2 instances. So these are the two instances. So if you wanted to learn networking or commands such as SSH, which will facilitate you to connect to remote machines, commands such as SCP to copy the files from one server to another server. In that case, you can leverage the free tier of AWS, or even GCP gives you credits, or Azure also gives you credits. You should be able to use those, and you should be able to set up multiple servers, and you should be able to start exploring the commands such as SSH. Let me see if I have a SSH command in the history. You can actually search for your commands in the history. Now you see I'm actually connecting to the remote machine using this command. This is one of the machines which is provisioned from AWS. Now I'm connecting to the remote machine via SSH, and I'm running this important command called as hostname -f to get the name of the host on the remote machine. Okay, so in case if you want to get hands-on like this, you have to have the remote machines as well. You should be able to use cloud platforms such as AWS, GCP, Azure, etc., and you should be able to practice. And these are a little bit advanced, but essential skills. Understanding SSH in depth is very, very important. Also, you have to make sure you set up a few additional softwares to get understanding about um, let me yeah, to get understanding about networking concepts. Let me see. Yeah, there is one more tab here, right? So you see here, you can actually experiment by setting up a database such as MongoDB, Jupyter Lab, Apache 2, the associated ports with them. To experiment all these things, you need to have additional servers. AWS or any cloud platform can come handy in that scenario. Once again, I'm reiterating, as part of the description, we'll be providing details related to playlist. You can visit that playlist, and you will be learning all these things in a structured manner.
Right, sir. So, as you were just mentioning SSH, can you tell us more about networking in Linux, for example, using SSH for communication?
Yeah, so SSH is one of the important command with respect to connecting to the remote servers. You see here, uh, if you have to talk to the remote machine, which is provisioned from EC2, AWS or Azure or GCP, there has to be SSH process running on it. And whenever there's a process running on a remote server, there will be a port number also associated with it. Okay. For SSH, the port number is nothing but 22. Unless this SSH process is running on that remote machine, you will not be able to connect to it. In the similar manner, if you want to host your web application or website, you need to have a Apache server or secure Apache server or Nginx server or secure Nginx server. Again, the port numbers will be 80 or 443. Unless you have a application server which can host the application, you will not be able to deploy the application. Also, there might be databases on the remote machines. You have to connect to the remote databases on the remote machines. One of the key is nothing but the networking. Now, to validate whether networking is working between the server or system from which you are trying to talk to that external service, there is one very important command called as telnet, which will facilitate you to troubleshoot the issues related to networking. For example, let's say I'm not able to connect to the remote machine using SSH command. I can actually validate whether 22 port is enabled on the remote server if the application is running on 22 port number or not using a simple telnet command. Now let me scroll down here. Uh, Let me go to my Linux machine. Now this is the remote machine, right? Let me copy this. So telnet is the command which will facilitate you to confirm whether SSH process is running or not on port number 22 on the remote machine. You can see that it is able to listen to port number 22, which means the application is running without any issues on port number 22. Typically, 22 is reserved for SSH only. Mostly, SSH will be running on this port only. If you are able to validate using telnet, then you should be able to connect also without any issues. Like that, you can also validate with port number 80 if application is running or not on the remote machine. Now you see I'm not able to talk to port 80 because there is no web application running on that machine. Now I can actually connect to the remote machine, start web application, open the ports in the firewall, then it will work as expected. Same is the case with the database such as MongoDB, Postgres, etc. So networking is not only limited to SSH, it is limited to most of the services that are running on remote servers. Even with respect to Gmail, also it might be running on some remote server. You can get the details by just saying ping www.gmail.com. Then you will be getting the IP associated with gmail.com. You see, this is the IP. You should be able to use this IP, or even you can say www.gmail.com with the telnet, and you can try 80 as well as 443 to see if HTTP and HTTPS are working for Gmail application or not. Let me give a try real quick. Telnet, then www.gmail.com, port 80. You see it is working. Let me also try 443. 443 is for HTTPS. Make sure you memorize these things. 22 for SSH, 80 for HTTP, 443 for HTTPS. These are reserved ones, and you can see that it is even listening on 443. Which means you don't need to enter any port to talk to these applications. You can directly go to the browser and say gmail.com. It will automatically connect you to the application. If the application is running on other ports than 80 or 443, then you have to enter port also after the domain such as this. But with most of the applications such as amazon.com, gmail.com, flipkart.com, typically they'll be running on port 443, which is HTTPS. And even if you say HTTP colon slash slash flipkart.com, it will actually convert it to HTTPS itself. It is called as redirection of HTTP traffic to HTTPS traffic. Typically, most of the times, all the standard applications or websites will be connecting through HTTPS only, which means the applications will be running on port number 443. So these are some of the basics related to networking. There is a complete series of lectures which I have covered all the basic networking concepts. We'll be uploading that video very soon as part of the playlist. If you go through that lecture where you will see almost 1 to 1.5 hour content, you will understand all these basics related to networking with hands-on practice.
Right, sir. Thank you. So, I know a lot of students have already started working on Linux as a part of their curriculum and because it's popular nowadays. So, can you tell me what are some of the most commonly made mistakes that students do when they get started with Linux?
Yeah, so unless and until you have direction related to some R&D type of work around computer science, don't get fascinated too much about Linux kernel and all. Don't get into those details. You just work on basic Linux commands. Spend enough time to practice Linux as much as you can. It will facilitate you to get used to all these important commands. You have to spend a lot of time in practicing how to combine these commands to get the problem solved with ease. It comes with a lot of hands-on practice by experimenting with a lot of use cases depending upon the resources which you have. One of the common mistake what people do is they get fascinated with these advanced terms called as kernel and all. I also go to colleges to talk to the students, and I know the quality of the professors in the colleges. They many times, not all, but most of them fail to set the right direction for the individuals. And when I actually went to one of the colleges for a workshop, the lecture was talking about means the professor was talking about giving a presentation on kernel. And then when I ask what type of operating system you guys are using, when I asked the students, they said putty. Putty is not even an operating system. Putty is just a tool to connect to the remote machines, similar to whatever terminal we are seeing here to connect to the remote machine. Putty is used to be the most popular tool on Windows to connect to the remote machines. Now we have better tools than Putty. We don't use Putty that often. They told Putty is not even an operating system. Even professor is talking about Putty as an operating system. And if I try to explain kernel related concepts to them, then they will go mad. Okay, there is no way they can understand the kernel related concepts when they don't even know ls command to list the files, mkdir command to create a folder, find command to find for the files, the standard directories such as /etc, varlog. Without the knowledge of these things, getting into kernel doesn't make sense. Even if you are familiar about those things, only when you are aspiring to be a phd candidate in computer science, where you want to innovate by going very low level when it comes to computer hardware and operating system, just learning basic linux commands and probably some shell scripting is more than enough. Don't do that mistake of carrying away with kernel, and don't spend too much of time on kernel unless you have the clarity.
Right,
and
sir.
and
That is some. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one more thing is, and another aspect is, people think that they have to invest a lot of money. That is one of the common mistake. They end up buying a fancy laptop, or they end up spending money on resources. They end up buying expensive servers. Some people who are a little bit rich or above middle class, they end up buying expensive boxes with. But a standard laptop should be good enough. Don't get too fascinated about power and all. For commands, you just need to have a 4 GB or 8 GB laptop with. If you have Ubuntu operating system directly on it, if it is Windows, you just need to have 8 GB laptop, and then there are tools out of the box. Don't try to install anything to get started with Linux. You just focus on the commands.
Right, sir. So, are there any best practices that one should follow while learning shell commands?
It is not only with respect to shell commands. Whenever you try to learn anything with respect to programming or any tool or technology, one of the common mistake what people do is they go to Google. Okay, Google is one of the anti-pattern. Let me explain what is the anti-pattern, because most of the audience might be entry level. They might not be familiar about a term called as anti-pattern. Anti-pattern means which is not supposed to be used, which can be detrimental or which can be counterproductive for you. Okay, which means it will be wasting a lot of your time. So Google is one of the anti-pattern. You should not go to the Google to explore anything to learn. You have to fall back onto the official documentation. and you have to stay focused, observe, and understand what is going on internally. Slowly and steadily, you should build the capacity of getting proper question. Once you get the proper question, you should be able to either go to Google or go to your friends and get the answer. Now, when it comes to the best practices, just go through the official documentation. Again, let me share my screen real quick and show you how I typically learn, not only Linux but also others. For now, I'll be limiting the scope to Linux. I'm again in the Ubuntu, which is set up on using WSL on Windows. If I want to know more about ls command, what I can do is, instead of going to Google, I can say ls -help, and I should be able to get the usage of this command. Okay, this is the official documentation relevant to this version. If you go to Google and search for ls, it will give the most popular answer. It don't know what in what context you are asking the question. Okay, for that reason, you just go through the official documentation, make a habit of reading the documentation, try to understand whatever you can. Over a period of time, your ability to interpret the information and learn will improve significantly. On top of help, there is also something called as man pages. When it comes to Linux commands, you should be able to use man command and say man ls or whatever command you want to explore. You will be getting the detailed documentation of the entire command. In some cases, you will also see the examples towards the end. Let me see when it comes to ls if they have examples or not. With ls, they don't. Let me actually man on grep. For grep, definitely you see examples. Okay, there'll be if for some commands there will be quite a few examples. So just observing the examples, you will learn quite a lot. Also, make a habit of understanding some of the keyword arguments. Sorry, not keyword arguments. Some of the control arguments. So, what are control arguments? For example, already I have ran a command called as ls space -ltr. So, LTR are nothing but control arguments for ls to control the behavior of the command. Okay. For example, if I just say ls, it will just list the files and folders. You see here, it is just listing files and folders. Now, if I say ls-l, actually list the files and folders with additional details for each and for each and every file and folder. We are seeing these additional details. By default, these details are sorted by name. You see, it started with D, then L, then M, then P. After all uppercase, it have gone through lowercase characters, right? Now, instead of sorting by name, if you wanted to sort by time, you can add one more control argument. Control arguments actually control the runtime behavior of your commands. Now you can see that the files are actually sorted by time. You can see the latest one at the top, oldest one at the bottom. If you want to reverse it, you can add R. So LTR are the control arguments which you can use to get all the files and folders along with the details where the files are actually sorted, or files and folders are actually sorted by time in ascending order. Like that, you can also use S instead of T. It will actually sort the files and folders by size. You see, the largest one came at the bottom. If you want to understand these things, one of the ways is you can actually say ls space -help. Now, if you actually go through some of the control arguments, if you just go through these details, even as a naive, even if you're running the command for the first time, at least out of these 20-30 options, you will be able to understand 2-3 options, right? So, and also one of the good thing is some of the control arguments mean same thing wherever similar commands, wherever we run similar commands. For example, in this case, when I run lsr, we got the files in ascending order, files and folders in ascending order by size, but this is a little bit cryptic. We don't know whether it is MB or GB unless and until we calculate, right? So there is an option called as H, which stands for human readable format. H stands for human readable format. S stands for size. R stands for reverse. L stands for list the attributes. Okay, now you see the sizes are in human readable format. Now, even du command, which we have seen earlier, have S for summary, lowercase s for summary, which means it will summarize all the details, and H for again human readable. We are talking about sizes, and we might want to see the details in human readable format, right? So du-sh, then dot is actually summarizing all the files and folder sizes, and it will give us the overall size of this folder. Okay, and it will be in human readable format. As there are quite a few files and folders, it is taking a little bit of time. But what I'm trying to convey is these keyword arguments are, sorry, not keyword, I'm mixing up Python with this. In Python, keyword arguments are very popular. These control arguments might mean same thing with respect to multiple commands, and over a period of time, if you learn these things for one command, wherever you are exploring similar commands, automatically they'll mean the same thing. Okay, as it is, yeah, now you see, overall it is 12 GB. If I want to get size of each and every file and folder in this location, I can use star instead of dot, and you can see that the sizes are in human readable format. H stands for human readable format, T stands for time, R stands for reverse, capital S for size, L for list, so and so forth. Okay, just to make sure you follow these best practices of going through the official documentation and then learn, you should be good to go. On top of it, if you are from Windows background, typically in Windows, whether it is ls or ls or ls, all are same, all mean same. But when it comes to Linux, it's case sensitive. So when you actually transition to Linux, make sure you understand that these three are different things, and make sure you practice based on that. That way, lot of hiccups in the initial stages will be easily overcome. On top of it, typically in Windows, we tend to use spaces when it comes to files and folders. It is not a good practice to use spaces in files and folders. Even though it is supported in Linux, I would recommend you to avoid having spaces in files and folders or any special characters in files and folders. Just use plain text, and we should be good to go. So just try to adapt to these some of the best practices to avoid as many hiccups as possible at the beginning of your learning stage.
Right, sir. I mean, this was something really. I mean, this I knew. I have worked on this thing, and the like hyphen commands that you were mentioning, they really help in data analyzation better. So, what is the difference between Bash on Linux and MS DOS on Windows?
Yeah. So all the operating systems will have command line tools. Bash is one of the command line tool in Linux. DOS or PowerShell are nothing but command line tools on Windows. Okay. So even when if you actually go to the history of Windows, the first version of not Windows but Microsoft, the first version of their operating system is DOS, not Windows. DOS means it will just give a black screen like this, and you have to run commands to interact with it. Even Microsoft Word, Microsoft, at the time, I don't think we have PowerPoint, but we have Word and few other things. I'm talking about 95, 96 time frame. Okay. And we used to use the black screen even on Windows. So the black screen on Windows is called as DOS. Eventually, it is evolved into PowerShell. When it comes to Linux, it is Bash based one. So on Bash, you will be able to use commands such as the ls-ltr to list the files, so on and so forth. Let me share my screen real quick, and then let me walk you through. So whatever you are seeing is nothing but Bash. Okay, because I am in the Linux operating system that is set up on top of Windows using WSL. Now, if I exit from here, you see it says PS. PS stands for PowerShell. Okay, and I'm in the home directory of the Windows system using PowerShell. Now, if I say ls-ltr, it will not work because ls is Linux command. Just ls will work because they have introduced the ls recently in PowerShell, but the control arguments getting the help and all will not work on DOS or PowerShell. With respect to DOS or PowerShell, the important commands to list the files is nothing but dir. Okay, whereas in Linux we use ls-ltr, so and so forth. Now, when it comes to the abilities, Linux is a lot more advanced compared to PowerShell or DOS. They are trying to catch up with PowerShell. Instead of making PowerShell as capable as Linux, they have introduced WSL in the recent versions. So that's where Windows is also supporting Linux officially. And that's why you see WSL, and using that you should be able to get into the Linux and you can practice. Okay, now if I use WSL, let me actually say dir, then downloads. Okay, as part of the downloads, I have these files and folders, right? Now I'm actually getting into the WSL, which is Linux on top of Windows. I should be able to access all these files and folders that are there on Windows even through this virtual machine which is set up on Windows itself, right? So if I say ls-ltr, there is a downloads folder here. Let me show the downloads folder. Okay. Now I can actually say ls-ltr on downloads. You see, whatever output we have seen earlier now is visible as a Linux output. So WSL actually facilitated us to run all popular Linux commands on Windows file system without any issues. But traditionally, Windows used to have PowerShell. Again, PowerShell is relatively new. Before that, it used to have something called as DOS. You can also launch the search bar and search for DOS here. Okay, DOS is also known as command prompt. Now this is DOS. Okay, uh, whatever you see as part of PowerShell also works for DOS. They still keep DOS as one of the app primarily for the reverse compatibility. In this case, DOS and PowerShell will work almost in similar manner on Windows 11. In earlier versions of Windows, these two are different, but they are closing the gap. They are still maintaining the DOS for the existing customers for the reverse compatibility.
Right, sir. So, what is a virtual machine and what is the Docker container and what exactly is WSL in Windows?
Yeah. So as industry have evolved, instead of buying computers for everything, they buy one mammoth computer, big computer. Uh, when it comes to the configuration of the computer, the memory typically in our laptop will be 8 GB in most of the cases. In some cases, it can be 16 GB. Those who can afford expensive laptops. In some extreme cases, like me, I have a 64 GB Mac. The memory itself is 64 GB. Beyond 64 GB, out of 100 computers, probably 0.1% will be having 64 GB. Majority of them will be having 8 GB or 16 GB when it comes to the personal computers. Now, when it comes to the computers on which applications are deployed, instead of buying small computers like us, the companies buy mammoth computer or they provision from the cloud. Okay, so when they buy mammoth computer, you might end up getting 256 GB RAM and 32 or 64 or even 128 cores. And when it comes to the size, hard drive, it can be like 32 terabytes or 64 terabytes of storage. Now, you can't run a very small application on that mammoth computer. Instead, what we do from that mammoth physical computer, we actually provision virtual machines. Virtual machines means smaller computers on a big computer, which is predominantly based on software. It's not hardware. It's a virtual computer. That's why it is called as virtual. It's not real. These will be hosted on those mammoth computers, and it actually streamlines the process of spinning up multiple computers pretty fast. Otherwise, if you have to buy physical computer for everything, buying a computer is a big thing, and on top of it, you need to install operating system, and you have to spend quite a lot of time to make it security compatible with the within the organization and all. So virtual machine is disruptive in that sense, and it started around 20-25 years back. Then came the Docker. So even the virtual machines will facilitate you to create smaller computers out of a bigger computer to run applications. If I have to shut down or if I want to spin up multiple virtual machines, still it will take time. So Docker actually simplified that process further. It is a lightweight virtual machine. It is similar to virtual machine, but it is much more lightweight. Virtual machine is not the right word there. We term it as container. Now it spins up much faster compared to virtual machines. As of today, the way the computers are set up in the organizations is they buy a mammoth computer. Then in that mammoth computer, they will have eight or 16 virtual machines. On top of those 8 or 16 virtual machines, they will be having hundreds of Docker containers, which will actually host the application. So uh, the main container is nothing but the physical computer, then virtual machines. Within virtual machines, we have the Docker containers. Now, WSL stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux. As Windows started supporting Linux very aggressively since they introduced Azure, they facilitated us to create Linux virtual machines on top of Windows easily using this WSL. Let me quickly share my screen once again. Okay. Uh, Now I'm outside the Linux operating system on Windows. I can run WSL-L-V command to see what are the current virtual machines. As of now, there is only one virtual machine. It is of flavor Ubuntu 20.04. It is in stopped state. There is also command called as WSL-L-online, which will list all the different versions of Linux that are supported on top of Windows out of the box. We have Ubuntu. Ubuntu by default is nothing but Ubuntu 18.04. On top of that, we have these three flavors. Not only Ubuntu operating system, we also have SUSE Linux, open source SUSE, Kali Linux, Debian. These are the different Linux flavors which we have, and we should be able to set up multiple virtual machines using these additional what we say distributions we have. We can also have custom distributions, and we can create custom virtual machines also. WSL on Windows is primarily to set up Linux based systems on Windows quickly.
Right, sir. So I guess this will be my last question. What one should focus on after learning basic Linux shell commands?
Yeah, so it's a very important question. It all depends upon what you are aspiring to be. Irrespective where you stand, if you are clear about your path, if you want to be a DevOps engineer, then after Linux, you have to focus on Ansible or cloud. You can start with one of them, but you have to learn the other also. Either you can start with Ansible and then learn cloud, or you can start with cloud and then learn Ansible. After learning these two, then you have to focus on Terraform, and then you have to focus on building CI/CD pipelines. All these five skills are inevitable over a period of time. By the time you gain 2 to 3 years of experience in IT, you should be familiar about all these things to have a successful career in DevOps engineering. If you are aspiring to be data engineer or QA analyst or business analyst or application engineer, then after learning Linux, you have to switch to the application development related stuff. If I have to suggest my kids, after learning Linux in the first year, by the end of the first year, if you are able to learn all the important Linux commands, in the second year, if my kids have to be a application engineer, then I would suggest them to focus on Python as programming language, or Java as programming language, or Go as programming language. Once they learn one programming language on top of Linux, I would suggest them to go with SQL. Okay, Linux. Actually, after Linux, I would suggest to go with SQL. Then I would suggest to go with programming language. By the end of second year, or by the end of third year, if they are comfortable in Linux, SQL, and programming language, then in the fourth year they can focus on cloud in 4.1, and as part of the 4.2, they can actually get into a real time project to get to implement all these skills end to end, and to feel that they have achieved something over a period of 4 years. Irrespective of your engineering background, you can follow this path. You don't need to be a computer science graduate. First year, focus on Linux. Second year, focus on SQL. Third year, focus on programming language. Fourth year, in 4.1, focus on cloud, and try to come up with simple projects and see how you can leverage all these skills and build end-to-end application. Then you are easily employable, or you can even be an entrepreneur where you can club your core skills, core engineering skills with the computer science skills, and eventually it might lead to a entrepreneurial path also. So to
Right, sir.
answer this question, yeah, to answer this question, it all depends upon the path you have chosen. Once you learn Linux, you have to decide what should be learned next.
Right, sir. So before we close this session, would you like to give a footnote to the viewers who have been watching this session for the whole hour and something for them?
Sure. So thank you very much for being patient and trying to understand as much as you can. Don't get overwhelmed with all the topics that are covered. Both GFG as well as Itversity are there for you to make sure we set the right path to excel in your future. I will tell you a small story around this, especially those who are actually pursuing the college degree, right? In Panchatantra, there is a story about three fishes, right? Sumati, Kalamati, and Mandamati. Actual names are a little bit different, but in Telugu, when I read, the translation talks about Sumati, Kalamati, and Mandamati. The meaning of Sumati means kind of a good mind. Kalamati means spontaneous mind. Or actually, you can think about Sumati as a proactive mind. Kalamati is a spontaneous mind. Mandamati is a dumb mind. So there are these three fishes, Sumati, Kalamati, and Mandamati, who are actually living in a pond. And one day, Sumati overheard a fisherman thinking about catching all the fish, and it went to the friends and told that, okay, we are at a risk. They are trying to catch all of us. It's better for us to go to the sea from here so that we are survived. Then Kalamati and Mandamati, Kalamati said, being a spontaneous mind, it told, we will see if we really come, if you are really at risk. I don't care at this time. And Mandamati just followed Kalamati. Whereas Sumati, after attempting to convince them, it could not, and it just go by itself into the sea. And the next day, actually, the fishermen caught these fishes, and Kalamati acted as if it is dead. And the fisherman dropped the dead fish into the water, and it survived. Whereas Mandamati got panic, and it just started jumping up and down, and the fisherman just banged on its head, and it died. Now, if you relate this to your journey of becoming a graduate, okay, what are the characteristics of Sumati? It actually is vigilant around what is happening, and also it is prepared. If it is at risk, what it should be done, what it should be doing, right? And it actually realized that, okay, there is a ocean somewhere else, or sea somewhere else, and we when it is when we are in risk, we can actually go there. And it also prepared to swim there, right? To swim to the sea, it has to be prepared. If you think from its perspective, it has to be prepared. Overnight it cannot say that, okay, I can swim there, right? It should have prepared over a period of time. So from engineering first year one, if you actually inculcate these characteristics of being Sumati, being proactive, you can actually be vigilant about what is going on in the industry, what are the key skills that are required to survive, and you can be prepared. And by the end of the fourth year, you will be in a much better situation. If you try to be a Kalamati, still you might you might be able to crack it, because you are spontaneous enough. You might take your own risks, but risks are risks. If the fisherman is not dumb, if he might suspect that this fish is acting, then he would have killed that also, right? It is always a risk. So even in your case, if you just try to focus on that one night batting with respect to giving the exams, and faking not the experience but the skills, and getting into the interview, if the interviewer is smart enough, he can get hold of you, and eventually you will struggle to get the job. But if you act as Sumati, and if you build your skills leveraging the 4-year degree in parallel to your college degree, irrespective of what is going on in college, then you will be well prepared, and you will be definitely be able to get into the job which you deserve. And don't ever try to be Mandamati, which means you should not follow others blindly. Okay, if you follow blindly, you will be at a very serious risk. You will not go anywhere except going through the drain. So that's the footnote which I wanted to share with especially those who are aspiring to be engineers in next 2 years, 3 years. Those who are already experienced, definitely learning Linux will add quite a lot of value. You will be a lot more productive on your day-to-day job, and it will get you good work-life balance also. Okay, so make sure you learn these essential skills such as Linux, SQL, even if you are experienced, and it will definitely improve your productivity.
Thank you, sir. That was a very insightful and inspiring note. I mean, a lot of people have joined us and have stayed with us throughout this session, and I'm sure they learned a lot from you. I personally learned a lot today. I am just a Linux beginner, but I think I have some confidence with the basics now. So thank you so much, and thank you for answering all of our questions. For those of you who are typing questions in the chat, you can always connect with Sir on LinkedIn and ask your questions personally to him. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. So thank you everyone for watching this session, and thank you so much, sir, for sharing all this valuable information with us, and have a great day ahead.
Yeah, just to conclude, we can also have another Q&A just to answer the questions related to the audience. I will work with you to plan another Q&A around the same topic in next 2-3 weeks, and we can take it further.
Sure, sir. That works for us. We'll, conduct a survey where people can actually share their real-time questions with us because
Yeah,
it's not possible to take questions in a live chat. So
correct,
I guess
correct. Yeah.
that's something we can look forward to. So thank you, everyone. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
so sorry to interrupt you. So yeah, if you are taking the survey, definitely we can write a blog. I will help you in getting the blog, and we can circulate the blog to them so that all the questions are answered. And also, if even if they have some follow up questions, we'll plan something.
Sure, sir. That works with us. We'll get in touch with your team. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day ahead, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.